But yeah, we move on to AI news in China?
Yes. So moving on, there is a lot of AI news coming out of China because last week Nvidia basically said that they're going to resume selling their H20 chip to China. So earlier the US had restricted access to this and like back in April, I think, and we'll get into that more. But now Nvidia is coming and selling back to China. And then the second thing we want to talk about within this story is the Kimi K2 model, which is Moonshot's new open source model. And it's making headlines very similar to what we saw with DeepSeek. Because it is open source, it's performing really well, and they actually trained it in like a different way to make it more agentic. So we'll talk more about that as well. Yeah. But we can start with Nvidia.
Yeah, so Nvidia resumes sales of its H20 chips in China as part of the U.S. negotiations on rare earth minerals. Basically, China agreed to restart rare earth shipments back to the U.S. manufacturers, which I think China owns like 90% of their rare earth market.
It's like insane.
And so as a result, Nvidia will now start shipping the H20 AI chips, which is specifically designed in 2022 to comply with the U.S. export restrictions while still maintaining access to the Chinese market. So it's essentially a scaled down version of like Nvidia's flagship H100 processor, and it's the most advanced AI chip legally exportable to China. So they literally just made it so that they could export it to China's market. And then, like, in April, Trump was like, no, we can't be doing this. And this actually received bipartisan support. And then in the last couple of months, Jensen Huang has been campaigning so much to open back up. He's been grinding. Have you been seeing what he's been doing? I was like,
grinding.
I didn't realize. Like,
I feel like he's a really good CEO.
He is. But yeah,
the articles are always like inside employees that choose not to be named say Jensen Huang never wanted this life for himself. He'd rather be focused on Nvidia, but he has no choice but to politic.
No, and he's been politicking well.
I also think this is like one of those issues where like you can kind of make the argument either way, and like we can get more into it, but it's like we are codependent on each other.
I mean, like the entire reason this entire thing started was because of the tariffs. Like when Trump was being ridiculous and slapping insane tariffs on China. And then like everything after that was just like fully a retaliatory game of like China being like, well, we know you need us, so we're going to take this away. And then us being like, okay, well, we know you need this, so we're going to take this away.
And rare earth minerals, there's like 17 kinds, and they're in like all of our electronic devices, but they're also in like all of our defense.
And like more so than China, even just like having the rare earth elements, they are the only ones that know how to process it. Yeah. And so it's like, even if you go find somewhere else where you can get it from, they're the only ones that can process it into a usable form.
You know what's funny is like tariffs and stuff would come up in like high school debate, which now must be like 5 to 10 years ago, right? And like rare earth minerals was like one of the like most important things like then too. Like it's like in terms of what we're depending on China. Yeah, like it hasn't changed. Yeah. Like if they decide to screw us, we are just like screwed.
Yeah.
Well, but then at the same time, they screw their own economy. That's like part of the thing too.
Yeah. No, it's like I don't think they would unless like we give them a reason to. But like
yeah.
Well,
the reason why Jensen Huang really cares about this is because in 2024, China generated around $12 billion in revenue for Nvidia, which is around 10 to 15%. And so it's a huge chunk of the pie. And he's also worried about Huawei catching up. So Huawei is like kind of like the China competitor in terms of hardware. And they were able to make a similar GPU to the H20, which is like nowhere near Nvidia's like leading GPUs, but still like switching over to Huawei's stack is like really worrisome for them. And so right now Huawei like is kind of limited to how many GPUs they can make themselves. So there's like still many hurdles that they have to cross, but he's like, the longer that we close this up, the worse that our competitive edge in this market for China is going to be. Like, we don't want to cut off this supply because then they're going to be forced to be independent. We're not sitting on some like material the way they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's crazy how fast things move because TSMC has like already repurposed all the lines that were building H20s, which is insane because like now apparently there might be delays of like up to 9 months in like getting this production back to the point that it was at and having the supply to send to China. And so in like 2 months, they've already repurposed all of this and it's setting them back another 9 months. And so like to Maya's point, you get behind really, really quickly.
It's still expected to generate like $15 billion in 2025 from
Yeah.
China. So like Nvidia stock obviously did well in the news, is up like 4.5% during that day. And then I think it corrected a bit, but like the general outlook's positive. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Nvidia is a long hold for sure. No investment advice from us. But yeah, I wanted to go into why for those who are curious about the H20, and why it's not worrisome that we're giving it to them, because I do think there's a point of like, oh, if we just give them a bunch of H100s and H200s, which are like the better GPUs, like they could build better models.
They'll have the compute they need.
Yeah, but but basically the H20 chip is optimized for running inference and not training models, because it has a bunch of restrictions. It can only run the actual model, but it can't help train larger models. And so when I was looking at DeepSeek R1, it was primarily trained on Hopper GPUs that they had from prior to like the ban, and then 30,000 H20 chips, and then 10,000 H800s and 10,000 H100s, which they probably got through like Singapore's back channels or something like that. And so a large majority of their cluster is not on H20s. So it doesn't mean that like if we give these chips, they'll be able to make like another competitor model just on the chips alone. Like they'll be able to do it because they like make some other breakthrough that we haven't made or something like that.
Do you know how long we've been selling H20s to them, just in general? Because like this was like an established process of something we were doing.
3 years.
3 years?
Since 2022,
Okay.
yeah. And I think the actual bigger story behind all of this is actually the CUDA platform. CUDA stands for, I don't know exactly what CUDA stands for, but it's CUDA. And this is the software layer on top of the chip. So to be able to use the chip, you need the software. And what's crazy, and I didn't realize this, but over 50% of global AI researchers use CUDA. So creates a network effect that like all of the standard libraries are on top of CUDA to be able to train these models. So there's a huge development ecosystem. So when we lock them out of these chips, we also lock them out of this like developer ecosystem. Yeah. So the other thing, a part of this entire story is that even though Huawei's making these chips and Huawei's making their own software on top of these chips, Chinese AI researchers can't even like use build on top of that software because they don't know how to. And so even when Chinese models like DeepSeek run on our hardware, they only achieve 60% of the inference performance provided by NVIDIA's H100s if they don't use CUDA. They're also reliant on NVIDIA's software, which is never really talked about in the, I feel like not talked about the like mainstream media.
Yeah, it's basically like the same argument that Jensen Huang made, which is that you want China to be on the United States' software stack. And I think like, who is the one that's in the Trump administration out of All In?
David Sachs.
David Sachs, I think, made the same argument as like cryptos are, AIs are. And so that is like the main argument for it, is like you prefer China to be on like our software versus like building their own entire systems. I was reading a Substack article about this by Nate Jones, and he basically talked about how when we think of China and the US, we should think more about like creating AI that will like serve humans versus AI that will serve itself, and how like ultimately China and the United States have to work together. And he drew like interesting comparisons during like the time of nuclear proliferation, and how like even though like it was literally the Cold War, like the US and Russia still had like certain lines of communication where they realized it was just like mutually beneficial to help each other.
Yeah.
And like he kind of makes the argument that like we should be working with China more on AI, and like we can recognize that like certain things are like competitive, like how AI is going to be in like our defense systems and stuff, but our like top AI researchers should actually be like meeting and like talking about safety together.
We also get a lot more insight into what they're doing than they get into what we're doing, just because like most of the things that they put out are open source.
I'm also just like curious as to like the policy angle of like why we like cared so much to close H20s.
I just think we needed something. Like we needed something that they actually care enough about that we could take away.
It's also very debated how like effective they are. Like a lot of people do think that they're like legitimately going to help China's AI capabilities quite a bit.
Well, all the technical blogs I read about this don't think that.
I feel like the average congressperson does.
But they're not the top researchers and experts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which if I was a congressperson, I would just like I would just realize that there are things above me that I might not understand.
Yeah, I mean, like, you could say that about, like, climate change. Like, all the top scientists aren't, like, conspiring against us to tell us climate change is real. Like, it's like I don't know, that's, like, a lot of things.
But it's like, what would the alternative have been?
It also is a good trading tool, right? Like,
it is a good trading tool, but I think, like, the way it's talking about in the media is like, oh my God, China's going to take over because they have the H20s, which is like, no, there's just no way they can do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to China taking over. Moonshot releases.
This might be worrisome, this next story.
This is definitely worse.
The Kimi K2 model. I think that's a sick name. It's basically the Moonshot AI's latest model, and it uses mixture of experts architecture, which we'll talk more about, and it has 32 billion activated parameters at a time with a query and 1 trillion total parameters in the whole model.
And in terms of like benchmarks, it's pretty impressive and competitive with US models. It beats Claude Opus 4 on like some of them. It has better performance than some of OpenAI's coding models. And it's way cheaper. So for like input tokens, just like for context, it's like 15 cents for every 1 million input tokens and 250 per 1 million output tokens. And Claude Opus 4 for its input tokens charges 100x that. So it's 15 million per input token and 75 million per output token. So it's like way cheaper.
Yeah. If you didn't know, Kimi K2 was built by only 200 people, with very few of them having frontier experience, and they had also a modest GPU budget just because of the restrictions. And so the fact that they were able to make such a like competitive model with such little is something that people have been talking about. And I feel like when DeepSeek was first released, everyone was super worried, and this one didn't really make the headlines like DeepSeek did.
Well, it was DeepSeek's RL or
R1.
like it was R1 that made all the headlines,
Yeah,
right?
but not V3.
And the reasoning model made the headlines. And isn't this the non-reasoning model?
It's a non-reasoning model, but I think do you
think they'll release a reasoning model?
Yeah, they have plans to.
So then do you think that'll be what makes the headlines?
Yeah. So like,
because isn't this the same thing that happened last time?
Yeah, because we talked about V3. We talked about how insane V3 was, and then a month later they released R1.
But that's when like everything actually moved.
Yeah,
like I still
yeah.
don't understand why.
Well, so actually I was reading a Substack about this because this guy was like literally saying this is the same story repeating ourselves.
Nvidia?
No, we definitely shouldn't. We should just buy at the dip when it happens. He was like the story is literally repeating itself. It's like the non-reasoning model gets released, the reasoning one's gonna get released. People are gonna get worried all over again, and then people are gonna be not worried all over again when OpenAI releases like GPT-5 or something like that.
We
like
have all our tweets ready to go from now.
But yeah, a huge part of the reason why this model was competitive was because it was trained on a different data set, and two, it used a different optimizer called the Muon optimizer instead of Atom W. And we can talk about what optimizers are, but yeah.
Yeah, they use agentic data pipelines that were like, a lot of them was like synthetic data.
They basically have a bunch of like real world scenarios. So like the same things that we were talking about for the browsers, like booking a flight or ordering food delivery, those are the types of like data sets, like the actual data sets that are being used, which we've like never heard of that being used before. And I feel like traditionally in the US and like with our model players, they're basically like, the longer we make this model think, for example, like the better answer we can get out of it. Like either you provide like more compute to it or you make it think for longer and we'll get like a better answer out of it. But their approach here was that let's just give them different scenarios, those scenarios being like real world scenarios, and it'll require the model to think more deeply, but not because we're telling it to think for longer, just because it has like additional context. And even on the benchmark, like I think we saw it was scoring the highest on the EQ test, which I think is also pretty telling.
And creative writing, too.
Which is so interesting.
Because, like, the one thing that we've noticed about models is that they're not creative. So the fact that they scored really high on creative writing makes me think that, like, we're hitting a new side to the models. Because, like, no matter how good we do on these benchmarks, model can't do something that a human hasn't done before, if that makes sense.
It makes sense.
And so it's like, how do you break past that?
Yeah.
And then the second thing that they did was they used the Muon optimizer. So really quick, in machine learning, you have a loss function, and it's basically a mathematical formula that measures how far a model's predictions are from the true target values. So basically says like, hey, how bad is this model? Then an optimizer basically adjusts the model's internal parameters or like their weights to minimize this function. And so the process of adjusting these weights is very compute intense. And so Atom W is like more compute heavy than Muon. As a result, they were allowed to use, I think, like 2x fewer flops, which like we don't have to go into flops, but you can just say, okay, this is like twice as better, and it was using 50% less memory during their training.
And it's interesting because one of the key differences between Atom W and Muon was that Atom W uses individual parameters, and it basically like gets the derivative of it, and then it calculates this loss function that Maya was talking about. But the difference with Muon is it looks at blocks of parameters instead of like the individual parameter, which is one of the reasons they're able to use like so much less compute. But it also means that like when you get the derivative of it, you're getting like the second order derivative of it instead of the first order derivative of it. And so people think that that's like another reason why it's like performing a lot better. It's really interesting because like this entire framework came out last December. So it's like very new. No one's ever really used it at like a large scale before. And so this is like the first time that we're seeing it, and it has like good results.
Yeah. And I think this is where China is like having a competitive edge over the US. So like no leading lab switched to the Muon optimizer model, even though it's been released since December. Like they've had enough time. And part of the reason why is because they have these huge training budgets, like these huge GPU budgets, where they can just spend 10x more money than they did before. And we haven't hit any sort of plateau point of spending more money doesn't result in more outcomes. So it's like if you're trying to plan for 6 months out from now and you have the money, you're just going to spend the money. Like you're going to de-risk your future rather than potentially spend a bunch of money on an optimizer model that might not work. Versus like Moonshot AI, it's like kind of in their name, Moonshot, right? Where they don't have the money to compete against an OpenAI or an Anthropic. And so they know that they're destined to fail. So then they're going to try these different
anything
things.
They can,
anything they can. And like in their blog post, they mentioned this thing, which I think a lot of AI researchers agree with, where if you were to read all of the internet data, you would be way smarter than a current model is. And like if our current models are trained on all of the internet data, and they're not as smart as a human, or they can't be as successful as a human. One, there's like a lack of data that we're not training on, which is like what we saw in the browser story where like, you know, there's like more to just searching.
Like
or there's
agentic
more
data.
Yeah, there's agentic data. But two, we're not learning enough. Like we're not being as efficient with our learning. Why does it take like 10 math textbooks to teach an AI model, but half of a textbook to teach a human on a math topic?
That's true.
Right? Is there something that we're doing algorithmically wrong? And this is where we don't know enough about our human brain. Like we don't know how we're adjusting our like internal neural networks, right? We're just guessing. We're just guessing based on math. And so a lot of the game of making a better AI model is like, I think that this algorithm that I'm going to use is going to result in a better AI model, but I have no idea because I have nothing to like, I don't know what my human brain looks like or acts like. We know like the end result of what we want, but we don't really know the path to get there. And so there's a lot of guesswork and money involved. And because there's so much money being poured into the like industry, we're allowed to do this. But it's like funny because you would think because there's so much money, we would be a little bit more risky with our money, but we're not. We're just spending, like the U.S. is just spending all its money on
compute. It's
on
literally
compute,
on
right?
compute and like data maybe.
So it's like, it's crazy because like we 10x, 20x, 100x the amount of money we put into AI in the last like 3-4 years. And we're still not being risky. Like a lot of the things that we're using are things that we discovered 5 to 10 years ago.
And we're causing a lot of other issues for ourselves too. Like when you look at compute and the grid and like overloading the grid and all of those things, I feel like we're not thinking about any of those things because we're like, we have the money, and if we have the money, it's fine. Like we'll figure the rest out later. Versus China doesn't have that luxury. And like the United States alone is basically forcing them to innovate because like we take away so much from them that they're like, well, I guess all we have left is our brains, so we'll just get to work and use them.
I think also the incentive for like a small lab to compete in the US, there is no incentive. The incentive is just like, okay, you do something and then the top lab just acquires you. And it's like, and like you don't always want to be that. I don't know.
I mean, like, I feel like the only scenario I see it is like it coming out of like a PhD program or something like that where your entire focus is research.
Once they stop seeing when scaling laws stop helping them. Like once they
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
saying compute help them, or when people start cracking down on profitability and like all the LPs dry up, then we're gonna see
Them care.
them care.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we're gonna see the bubble pop, and then no one's gonna make progress for 10 years.
The bubble
Like,
bop.
bubble. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think this brings us to like the question that I asked us this question a few days ago, which is like, why don't we think that US model has used mixture of experts? And basically mixture of experts is just like you only like light up a certain part of the model that's like focused on what the query is asking about. So it's basically like you have a query and then there's something called like gating where like you route the query and then it like goes to an expert, and it is like more efficient, and it's what Moonshot is doing with this model. And in terms of the answer to that question, it seems like GPT-4 did kind of do this. Like it had 8 smaller models, but it seems like people thought that it was like performing worse. And maybe, and like in general, it seems like there are like a different set of risks with mixture of experts where like it's more efficient, but you also have to be like really good at gating a query to the right set of experts. And if you don't, the expert could like hallucinate and you like think you get the right answer, but you don't. And so I wonder if they're just like,
It's like not worth
it's not
solving.
worth it. Yeah. And
Or,
like I'm
like,
sure
or
they've
it's
done it
also, like-
internally.
Yeah, or if they think it's like so risky because our models are so advanced and like benchmarking so well that like if they take this risk on something new, that like people kind of like lump in all together, and it's like significantly worse if it'll hurt their brand image. Like it could totally be a branding thing too.
But we have money for days apparently. So
Yeah,
And
we have
then
a
we'll-
lot of money.
and then Saudi's willing to fund our stuff too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like there's like no.
There's like no end in
no
sight.
end in sight,
Yeah.
And then I think the last piece of this is China's decision to open source their technology and how they're using this. They're not going to have the best model, and like the best companies. So like this is their way of reaching some amount of control where like developers around the world will like build on top of their technology, which I think eventually will become a lever for control, but I don't know how, because like I don't think it'll be data necessarily, and I don't think it'll be monetization. So I'm not sure. Maybe it's partially just like undercutting us.
There's few dollars to be made if you don't open source it. Like if you charge people to use it, people will not use it.
Yeah, so I'm saying like, but like they're charging so little that they're like probably not going to make much money off of it, right? And then like, do you think it's like a data thing?
No. I genuinely think that like they're gonna make so little money off of charging people that they would rather just make it open source, and the positives, like the positives of making it open source, like
it's just
greatly,
a PR move.
Yeah, like, or I think China just realizes that like no one's gonna pay for Chinese models right now.
No, I get that, but it's like
it's okay. For example, like it's not good enough to beat GPT-4 or Gemini or Claude, right? And so because it's not that good, like it is amazing, but it's not like the leading model. No one's gonna pay for it.
So you have to provide like some incentive.
I see.
If you wanted to cut costs, right, you would just use the open source model. If you're building a product and you don't care too much about the user experience and you're really caring about profitability, you're looking for an open source model. Like I don't think the people who are looking for like the cheapest model that is like slightly better than the leading open source model is like a good enough delta.
No, that all makes sense. It's more like what China's like. I think like China sees it as a strategy, right, to have like the whole world on their technology. And I feel like it parallels what they've done even in terms of like infrastructure, where they like go into Africa and provide a bunch of infrastructure for free, because then it's like when they need to call in a favor or like something like that. Like that's like been their whole strategy. It's like,
but I think that strategy is like over talked about or overhyped up, or what are you saying? Is like inflated in terms of its effectiveness.
yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess that's like a different conversation. I think it's more just like, okay, like with something like infrastructure, it's like very easy to understand, where like you can go to the leader of an African nation and be like, all the bridges and roads in this country were like funded by us, so like you're gonna do what we say, otherwise we'll stop funding it, and then they'll do it. But it's like not as clear with like an open source model like what their goal is, I guess.
I don't even feel like there needs to be a goal. I think the literal thing is that there is no incentive to make it, like there is so little incentive to charge for it that it's better to make it open source.
I see.
Like, I don't
That
think
makes
it's,
sense.
I think we're overthinking it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because also, it's not for the data. Like, you probably know this better than I do, but like when we use OpenAI, for example, like we're all sending API requests to them, and so like we're feeding them our data so that we can like get answers back. But in a situation like this, like, aren't you just like, you can clone it and run it locally, right? So like you're not even feeding them any data, so it's like not about the data at all.
A lot of people probably won't though. Like a lot of people probably will just use an API call.
Yeah. I mean, you can do that, but I'm saying like the
Like, they
data
probably
is
will get
probably
data
even like
from it.
less relevant
Yeah.
when it comes to like an open source model as opposed to like a closed source model where you literally have to feed them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then it
information.
becomes a scale thing where it's like if the entire world is like using your model, even if it's open source, you're probably collecting like a decent amount of data.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure you still are, but
Yeah.
for any of the like researchers, like they're not probably using any of that.
Yeah.
Or
that-
like
that makes sense.
enterprises aren't using any of that.
I am excited, maybe not so excited, but I'm excited to see, or I'm interested to
Mine's
see
face right now.
if our market crashes when Moonshot AI comes out with their reasoning model.
think it will. I feel like
You think people are going to price it in? I think it'll be a
I think
smaller
people just like
crash
it's very in recent memory that we overreacted
to like
DeepSeek.
DeepSeek. Yeah, that's true. That makes sense. Maybe we'll underreact to Moonshot AI, and then it'll take over our world. JK.
Maybe.